Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
Welcome to Hong Kong Confidential. I'm Jules Hannaford and I'm your host. I'm an Australian woman and I've been living in Hong Kong for many years. I'm a mother, a teacher, an author, and I want to share my wisdom and the wisdom of others with you. Thanks for joining me and I hope you enjoy the show.
You meet someone online and there's this instant connection. It's amazing how much the two of you just seem to click. They live somewhere far away and there's some plausible reason they can't travel to meet you. They tell you they're in love with you and you feel optimistic for the first time in a long time. They have a successful career, yet somehow they need money from you to solve a short-term problem, always with the promise of paying you back. Time goes on and they need more money more urgently. You've started to see the cracks and begin to wonder whether they've been lying this whole time. All of a sudden it hits you. You've been scammed. Fool Me Twice is the story of my mother, Jules Hannaford, a woman who was drawn into the dangerous world of sweetheart scams. After a trip overseas to meet a stranger, a dangerous altercation in a Manchester hotel room, and thousands of pounds lost for good, she's here to tell her story. Fool Me Twice, a true crime podcast, is available on Apple Podcasts, Ozcast Network, and anywhere you listen to your podcasts.
Today I'm here with Sarah Kalmeta. Hi Sarah, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Jules. It's a pleasure to be here.
Sarah, give me a bit of an overview of your career.
Yes, of course. So I started my career in aviation. I've been obsessed with the sky and the stars since I was a little girl. My first two words were for star and airplane, believe it or not. And I started working for a company just out of graduation from university that was at the local airport. And I unfortunately then lost my job due to the global financial crisis. And that was my first forced career pivot. But I often credit that as one of the best things that ever happened to me, because it then launched me into my career that took me to Los Angeles and then brought me to Asia. So that company then sent me to Singapore. I helped set up an office for them, train the staff, and I just fell in love with it. And I studied Mandarin in university. So I was able to use the language and the skills that I had gathered working overseas to stay. I sent myself to China, improved my language. I lived and worked in both Beijing and Shanghai. And then I found myself in Hong Kong. This is my 9th year here.
What exactly are you doing in Hong Kong?
So now I'm a dual entrepreneur. I have two businesses. One of them is Pivot Point, my coaching business. And the other one is Avata Limited. We're an e-commerce platform that focuses on wellness and health products. And we focus on conscious simplicity.
Oh, that sounds very interesting. So how did you get into coaching?
I've been one of those people that has always loved working with people, and I've been curious and I love to learn. So I've always read the personal development books. I did an executive certificate in global leadership, and I also just completed my MBA last year, focusing on HR and people. And when I was in my corporate role for the last 12 years, 10 of those was training new employees, creating training programs for my high potentials to become managers, as well as facilitating corporate training programs for Franklin Covey and EOS, these different MNCs that train for corporates. I was the facilitator within the company. And as I was doing this, I realized that people were coming to my office and closing the door to have those conversations that had nothing to do with work. And we would get onto topics of stress management, anxiety relief, relationships even. And it really sparked that fire for my love of working with people and helping them be the best version of themselves. And last year, I had another forced career pivot, and that led me to finally take that plunge, jump off the cliff with a little push and some wind under my wings. It was great.
I really love the name Pivot Point. How did you come up with it?
I was thinking about it, and last year, I'd been wanting to change for a while, but I was comfortable in my corporate role. It was easy, it was familiar, I had the network. And even though I wanted to change, the carrot was dangled in front of my face every time. And I never left it, never had the push. And because it was the second time it happened to me, I was able to notice the signs and had an intuition that it was coming. So I started to make other plans. And people around me in other industries, when I was having conversations with them, they were saying, "Oh, Sarah, that's ridiculous." Or "That's just because you're in aviation. And obviously, this is a hard time right now with borders closing and planes not flying." But then they started to lose their jobs and they were in shock and grief and denial. And it really made me realize that while they have the tools, most people put blinders on. And we often think just because we've done something for an extended period of time that we must stay there. But if you think about it, we change every moment of every day. We pivot into new versions of ourselves. We're mothers and fathers, brothers and sisters. We're sons and daughters. We're bosses, we're leaders, we're coworkers, we're subordinates. Every moment of every day, we're shifting into these different roles. And we do it without effort. As you get practice with something, it becomes effortless, it looks graceful. But at the beginning, it's a bit awkward and we get stuck. I'm a firm believer in change is a good thing. Growth is good. So that's how I came up with the name.
I think it's really interesting because for some people to make such a huge pivot or change in their career can be very daunting and it can be quite frightening and there can be a lot of fear involved with change. How do people overcome that, or how did you overcome that sense of not knowing exactly how it's going to turn out or whether you're going to be successful making such a complete change?
Well, I'm not going to lie. It's still something that I face today. The life of entrepreneurship is definitely different. Yes, you get to make your own schedule. Yes, you have the freedom, but you also have to find your own clients, develop your own business, do your own accounting, your own marketing, the creative side. And while you get exposed to that in the corporate world, it's very minimal. But with that comes excitement. I've always loved a good challenge, but it is a bit of a roller coaster. There's ups and downs. And not knowing is something that I would say really only at the end of last year, I let go of. And I'm sure it's going to come back and I'm going to want to know what's going to happen next. But part of what I left in 2020 was that need to control everything and that need to know. And I did a little ceremony, burned my old 2020 work journal and the campfire. I transformed the energy. And this year I'm hitting the ground running. And I feel like I've already accomplished more in 2 weeks than I did in 6 months last year. It's different for each person. And what I really do to work with people on that is to go back to what are their internal drivers, their motivators, what are their values? And then we can use that as a compass to help guide them through those pitfalls and those ups and downs of that not knowing.
I think your values and your priorities are key, aren't they? You have to know
Yes.
what they are, and then you've got to really change things so that they fit in with those values and those priorities. And they can change at any time. And I think during the pandemic, people's values and priorities have shifted a lot, haven't they?
100%. I think the pandemic really put a light on some of the things that we were ignoring. For many people, and I know this from experience, when you travel a lot for business, it's easy to ignore the problems in your life, whether that's relationship, whether that's business, family, the fact that you don't go to the gym as much as you want, whatever it is, it's easy to hide from it and make excuses. But one of the biggest tools, the most helpful tools I found, both last year and prior, is if I want to make a change and I'm not changing, I'm not doing it, I ask myself, is this a priority? Because if you change the language from I don't have time to I didn't make it a priority, you can see how that fits with you. And if it's feeling uncomfortable, then you know you need to make a shift and you need to start to take steps in that direction. If, however, it doesn't feel uncomfortable, then maybe that's no longer a goal of yours and you can let that go to make room for something else.
So, what do you love most about your work as a coach?
My top two values, speaking of values, are connection and curiosity. I really love to learn and connect with people. And by coaching, I get to do both. And that inspiration for me also comes from my clients. I get to learn every time I work with them and what works for different people. Sometimes they teach me things and I walk away with tools and insights that I wouldn't have had before because they're from all walks of life. Sometimes they're younger than me, sometimes they're older than I am. For me, it's a very dynamic and engaging environment, and that's what I really love.
Why do you think it's important for somebody to pursue their passion? Because many of us get stuck in what's safe, as we were saying, or that security of a regular payment and things like that. But why should people follow their passion?
We need to be creators of our own reality. We need to take responsibility for our actions. And when we work for somebody else or we don't take the time to follow things that we are interested in, then we lose that spark for life. We just start to get into that same old routine and we repeat the same day over and over. And then we lose motivation, we lose our creativity, and we lose a bit of our sense of self and our own self-worth, if you will, because we're constantly looking for others for validation that we did something right, that this is correct. And I listened to your podcast with Valentina the other day, and I know her as well. She's a friend of mine. And that was something that really hit home for me because it's applicable to everything in our life. If we give away our self-worth to others to validate, we will never be happy. And that's the same for relationships as it is for work. And so if we can shift that, following your passion does not mean that it has to be what you do for your main source of income. But in today's day and age, we live in a world where we do multiple things. A lot of people have side hustles or they have two businesses or they do volunteer work because those things refill their cup, that resets their energy. And then that enables them to go to their main role, whatever that may be, and show up fully rather than being exhausted or not caring and not producing their best work.
How does somebody know if they're at a point where they need to make a pivot or make a change in their life? What are some of the signals that we should be looking for? And I think it's really interesting that you say it's not just about career. It could be in your hobbies, your friendships, your relationships. It could be in all parts of your life, couldn't it?
The most basic question is, does this bring me joy? Am I having fun with what I am doing? Am I learning? And does it fit with my values? I'll give you an example. If your values are to save the environment and help with sustainability, but you work for a factory that produces single-use plastics, those are such opposite ends of the spectrum. They're diametrically opposed. And you're fighting against your own internal values every day that you're there. And so whether you think it's affecting you or not, because it doesn't align with you, it's just like a relationship. Everyone pretends to be something in the beginning. And then as they become their true self, there's friction because, hey, this isn't who I thought you were. And the same thing happens at work. So whether it is noticed by the employer first or the employee, at some point that's going to break down.
How can somebody know what their values are? Because there's so many to choose from. How can you narrow it down to your, say, top 6 values?
I would even say top 6 is too much. I encourage people to go through 2 or 3. And there are many, many value finding exercises you can find online. You can Google a list of words. But what you need to do is really narrow down the lens. So pick your top, let's say 20, and then you leave it there for a little while. Then you revisit it and you say, okay, I'm going to narrow this down to 10. And you start to look for words that are common, that they have some similarity. For example, I use curiosity, but curiosity has wonder, it has exploration, it has adventure, it has learning, and has development. So I could have chosen those 5 words as values, but I was able to encompass them with curiosity. That is what I encourage people to do is you don't have to do it all in one day, in one sitting. Sit with it, let it process, let it stew in your brain, and don't do anything else while you're doing it. Don't have the TV on, don't have music in the background, don't be having a conversation with someone else. Really give yourself that time to focus.
And why is it important that we understand what our values are?
Because our values are the driving factors in all that we do. That is the intrinsic motivators. That is the lens that we will look at life. And if we can understand those values, we can choose jobs to work with, we can choose industries to work in, we can choose friends to hang out with and spend our time, the correct organizations. And then what you'll find is you will naturally be able to refill your cup and reset your energy without having this, I'm exhausted. I just don't have time for anything. And when I use the word energy, we have many different types of energy. Most people think of energy in the sense of sleeping and then maybe creative or mental. They meditate to clear the mental space. But we need physical rest, we need mental rest, sensory rest. And in Hong Kong, a lot of us are overstimulated. We need creative rest. So you might love to create. You might be a painter, you might be a writer, but you also need to rest from that so that you can let your brain recover so that you can go back and produce your best work. We also need emotional rest, not saying yes to every single social event, especially for introverts. They might want to please their friend or their coworkers, so they say yes, but on the inside, they're hating every moment. And then they go home more tired than they would have been if they went home in the first place and then just caught up with that person separately. And then the final type is spiritual rest. And you can equate that to whatever your personal practice is. It's just the ability to connect with your body and have your mind in your body. So breath work is really important, feeling a sense of belonging. Whatever that means to you, that's something that you need to make sure that you have time for.
That's really lovely. Thank you for explaining that. I think that's going to really help people out there. Quite enlightening. So thanks a lot. I noticed on your website that you had a phrase, rediscover your edge. What does that mean?
The reason why I came up with this phrase is a little bit of background on myself. I used to be a figure skater, and my goal was to go for the Olympics. And I would get up at 3:30, have my cereal. I'd watch Rocky and Bullwinkle. I'd go to the ice rink. My mom would drive me, and I'd practice for 2 hours, change in the car, and then go to school. And I'd go back after school. And I knew my why. And my why was to get to the Olympics. So for me to get up early and to skate before and after school, that was okay. I was willing and able to give up those things because I had this dream and I was dedicated to pursuing it. The edge is a bit of a dual meaning. Competitive edge, businesses talk about this all the time. But from the figure skating perspective, it was a way to kind of encompass who I am as a person and talk about a lot of things are double edged. You can have too much of a good thing. You can work too much. Workaholism is a real thing. It leads to high performing anxiety, which is also something I experience. And sometimes we think, well, this is a good thing. And we do more and more and more, but we forget about all the other aspects of our life, especially people that get stuck or maybe have worked in the same field for 20 years and they're repeating the same day over and over. They've lost that spark of life. They're not showing up with their full self and they're not bringing that competitive edge to their business, whether it's their own or somebody else's.
Tell me a bit more about high performance anxiety. What is it and how does it impact people?
High performing anxiety is, these are the high achievers. These are the people that have success after success after success. A lot of times they achieve success at a very young age in comparison to their peers. And at work, they're excelling. They're on the fast track to becoming a partner or a CEO, and they're doing really, really well. So from the outside, it looks like they have everything put together. Their lives are envious. Other people look at their social media, whether it's Instagram or LinkedIn, and things seem to be perfect. But on the inside, they're falling apart. They're constantly feeling overwhelmed and on the edge of a nervous breakdown, and their personal lives are suffering. And they take out that stress and frustration. They have no outlet, particularly in the time of COVID when gyms are closed and bars are closed. Those typical outlets people utilize, they don't have access to. And their relationships start to break down, or they don't have healthy relationships. And then eventually that can then turn around to bite them so that their performance at work also suffers. So it's often a silent disease, if you will. It's not often recognized by friends and family because from the outside, they're putting up a front. They're showing the world, I'm okay. I've got this. I don't need your help. I can do it on my own. And they just get to a breaking point.
And stress can lead to physical difficulties as well, heart attacks, things like that. So people need to be careful, don't they?
Exactly. I have heard many stories and known in my network people who have worked a certain hectic, fast-paced lifestyle their entire life, not getting enough sleep, partying too much, always traveling. And then as soon as they retire, within a year and a half, they have a heart attack and pass away. They have some major disease, and their quality of life is severely diminished. And at the end of the day, we are not here to survive. We are here to thrive. And life is not all about work. So you're exactly right. Stress can lead to autoimmune diseases and other things that we've never looked at before because we used to define success by wealth and power. But we need to add health into that definition.
Absolutely. How can people be an obstacle to their own success?
That perfectionism. They want it to be perfect before they put it out. Whether that's writing a book, producing a podcast, starting their own business, they are so worried about every single minutia of what they're doing that they never put it out there. But the only way that we can learn is by putting something out there, getting feedback, and then correcting it. And I can tell you, since I launched my website in, I think it was June or July of last year for Pivot Point, almost every month I would have some edits or updates to give to the person who's helping me develop the website because I noticed a typo or I decided I wanted to change this word. I wanted to change the language. I had a new photo on there. And if I would have waited until what I thought was perfect, then I would have never made the website. I would have never gotten started. And I used to lie to myself and tell myself that I worked well under pressure and that's how I was successful. And if I had too much time, it wasn't my best work. And while, yes, I can work under pressure and I did perform well, how much better could I perform when I was not under pressure and when I had my full energy at my disposal? And when I reached the breaking point and I scaled everything back, I was able to see that. And now, I mean, it's a clear comparison of what I was doing before, who I was before, and what I'm doing now and who I am now.
That's really amazing. And I think that we can always learn from our mistakes and from feedback from others. And that's a positive thing. It's not being criticized, is it? But it's constructive criticism. And there's a way to take that on board and to develop from it. Would you agree?
I agree 100%. I actually had a question the other day on another podcast of what would I view as my biggest failure? I was stumped. I couldn't answer the question, but that's because I actually believe that every failure is a learning opportunity. And if I hadn't experienced that failure, I wouldn't be who I am today. And so this is the reframing that we need to do. We need to accept that these things will happen. We will never be perfect. So I also don't use the word perfect. I use the word progress. And just by taking that one step at a time, we can end up reaching our goal. This is our goal for the year. We break it down into quarterly, then break it down into monthly, and then weekly, and then daily. What is something I can do every single day that will make me reach that goal at the end of the year? But most people see the whole elephant and they can't eat that. The way to eat an elephant is one bite at a time. Not that I'm condoning eating elephants.
We're animal lovers here. That's so interesting because that's exactly what I tell my students at school is that you can learn so much more from your failures than your successes, and that it's actually a great thing to fail, or when one door closes, another door opens. Really thinking about, okay, I've missed this opportunity or this hasn't go well, but what can I learn from it? Or what other opportunities are out there? And that's something that it's taken me a long time to learn, but it's something that I have learned in my life. Do you think it's hard for people to see past their initial disappointment to understand that there could be other opportunity?
We often are looking at that closed door. We miss all these other opportunities around us and we have those blinders on. And often we're looking in the wrong direction as well. And so the reason why I have a triangle for my logo is twofold. I believe in a very holistic approach, mind, body, spirit. So we need to address all of these in order to be successful. And I'm not here to tell you what success is, it's your definition. But sometimes we're going in one direction and we might fall over, and then a different end of the triangle is pointing up. So now we have a new direction to go into. And if you look at engineering, they have a triangle as the tool for pivoting. And sometimes as well, students, I talk about this all the time, like a bow and arrow, you have to be pulled back before you can go forward. And so we really need to reframe and take a moment, pause. We need to acknowledge the grief that we're experiencing because when things change, we do go through a grief process, even if we want them to change. And that's the key. Even when you want something to change, even when you're the one asking for it, you still have to go through this process of letting go of who you were to make room for who you are now and who you will become.
That's so true. Do you do much work with young people, students in
That's
particular? What sort of things do you do with them?
For the last 4 years, I've been running this volunteer program with an aviation association to talk with students and help give them information about careers advice, how to network and do interviews. It was mostly focused on the aviation industry, but we would often talk about pivoting in and out of industries, transferable skills, and the importance of language and communication, and still do that today. And I also do volunteer work with several different associations. This evening, I'm actually going to be doing a group leader with the Amber Foundation, which is for ethnic minority women to help give them the tools they need to succeed. And so with students, I do a lot of careers counseling, advice on how to build up their presence and their confidence and conviction so that when they go into the interview, they feel prepared, and reminding them that it's okay to not know everything. And we work on their elevator pitches so that they can succinctly tell people what it is that they're about.
Well, that sounds great. I'm going to make a note of you because I think we might be able to invite you into school to work with some of our students in the near
Oh,
future. So that would be
absolutely
amazing. I think that would be brilliant.
I've actually wanted to do more with high school level students as well, because I do think a lot of these tools are really simple, but the students just don't have exposure to them. And one of the things that I really appreciate that I had exposure to when I was younger is I was in a program called Civil Air Patrol in the US, and it was a once a week thing when I was in high school, and it's auxiliary Air Force. So I learned about aviation. But through that program, I had the opportunity to lead the squadron and give commands. So I learned to project my voice. And I also had to present in front of adults. So from age 14, I was giving presentations weekly sometimes. And it was really what gave me that confidence. And now I always joke I'm the weirdo that loves public speaking and presenting. Previous corporate roles, everyone would come to me and be like, Sarah, can you do the presentation? Or can you please speak at the conference? We hate it. We don't want to. So that's something I'm really passionate about. And I want to work more with young students to help them build that confidence.
Do you have some key tips for public speaking skills?
Practice, practice, practice.
Yeah.
The only way you will get better is to practice. One of the other tips is record yourself. You see athletes recording themselves so that they can see where they did something incorrectly, where the technique can be perfected. Same thing with musicians, so they can see were they holding the instrument correctly? Were they using their diaphragm, or were they breathing perhaps incorrectly? So if you practice consistently and you video yourself and watch it back, you will start to notice your little habits and your tics. Are you constantly, I talk with my hands, I move them around a lot. Does your eyebrow raise up and down? Are you saying, Are you stumbling over? Do you say the same phrase every time somebody asks you a question before you start speaking? And we often miss these things. And by watching the video back, you'll be able to pick it up and make corrections where you see fit.
There's some great tips. Do you work with people with trauma?
Yes, I'm not a licensed therapist or psychotherapist, but I've gone through trauma of my own, family and personal traumas. And I'm a firm believer in that. Rumi has a quote, the wound is where the light enters. And by looking at those things that we don't want to look at, that's how we grow. And oftentimes people come to me with some of their personal issues because I've experienced divorce, I've had some family traumas. And because of that, I can share the tools that have worked for me. And oftentimes these same tools are the same things they can apply in business. And of course, if we get to a point where I'm not able to help them, I do have a network of people that I can refer them to. But oftentimes people think the word trauma means a really bad event that has happened. But it doesn't have to be this major, somebody passed away or you lost your job. But it can be something as simple as you were late and you missed the opportunity for that job you really wanted. And that had an impact on your psyche. And you now have that voice in your head that's putting you down, and then that's limiting you from being able to move in another direction.
Can you share some of the tools that you're talking about? that people can use to help themselves get through trauma?
What I would like to remind people is that you are not your thoughts. We have a lot of thoughts that go through our heads day to day, and we don't need to identify with every single thought that we have because those are going to change. So, what we need to do is not believe everything that we think. Sometimes we look at the worst case scenario. So, one of the ways that I work with people is they list out everything that can happen that's bad. Then I reverse it and I say, okay, but what are the good things that can happen? And just as outrageous as some of the things that they come up with on what can happen, I mean, sometimes people go, oh, I'll lose my job and then I'll lose my house and then my partner will leave me and then my kids won't talk to me and then I'm going to develop a disease and then I'll die young. It's like, wow, that has just spiraled out of control. So I ask them to then talk about, okay, what's the best thing that could happen? And then they start to get this energetic flow of all these things and they get excited. They get that spark. And you can see these are two polar opposites. So we find things in the middle of what's achievable and what's realistic. And it sometimes makes them giggle because they realize now how silly it's a mirror to mirror back to them how silly that negative self thinking is. And the other thing that I would say for working through trauma is to pay attention. What are the emotions that you are feeling? Don't hide them. Don't repress them. Don't ignore them. Really sit with them and allow that to come up. And you may not have words for it at first, but as you develop your vocabulary for the emotions that you're feeling, you will be able to then identify what it is you need to do next. Who do you need to see to talk to? What book should you read? What tools should you pull out? But most people's language is limited to I'm angry, I'm sad, I'm happy, I'm upset. But beyond that, sometimes anger is actually embarrassment. Sometimes happiness is nostalgia, but that has an element of sadness as well. And as we expand our vocabulary, there's a really good, looks like a wheel of fortune, emotions wheel that you can just quickly pop into Google. And if you can just have that at your disposal, save it to your phone or put it up on your fridge, and you can start to dig down deep into the core of what you're feeling, then you'll be able to work through those things a lot easier. Because when you name things, it gives them power.
Absolutely. That is such good advice. What kind of things do you think are really good for the soul?
Being outside. That's definitely good for the soul for me. I recently have reconnected to nature and been spending a lot of time outside. And I love to camp and I love going to Long K1 because my phone does not work. I love what I do and I have a really strong work ethic. So sometimes it's hard for me to put it down, but it's important to reset. It's important to do things. And things that are good for the soul are very, very different for everybody. Sometimes that's cooking. Sometimes that's painting. Sometimes it's creating music, creating a DJ set, or going for a walk with their dog, spending time with their children, where they're having conversations together, not distracted on their phone while the child's watching TV. For everyone, that looks different. But I think the easiest way to feed the soul is to think about what you did as a child. I asked my mom what I did when I was little recently, and she replied to me on message, read books. And I said, yes, I know. I read books. I still read books. I love it. And I said, what else did I do? And she put, read books, LOL. But then we dug down, we found some other things, and I bought a paint by numbers kit recently. And it's actually great. It's a form of meditation because I bought a quite complex one. So you have to really focus to make sure you stay in the lines and you get in that flow state and everything else falls away.
Why do you think it's important to live a life of alignment and how can we achieve this?
I think it's really important to live a life of alignment because if you are not authentic in what you're doing, people will sense that. Whether they're more open to sensing other people's energy and emotions or not, they will sense it. Have you ever spoken to a used car salesman or these join my program now and earn 7 figures in 2 months? You know that behind that, it's not authentic. And so you don't believe it. And so whether it's a forefront of mind, it's conscious or it's unconscious, if you're not living in alignment, not only will you limit the opportunities available to you from others, but you will also limit yourself because you don't want to be doing those things. Deep down, you're not doing those things. So you won't be motivated. So you will go home and you will find ways to ignore all of that.
It's interesting because during the pandemic, we've all really had to develop resilience. I think everybody globally has had to build their resilience to cope with change, cope with fear, anxiety related to COVID. How can people build their resilience and continue to build it as this doesn't seem to be going away for a while?
Resilience, humans are very resilient. We have gone through a lot. If we just look at history and what our ancestors have done through different times and what they've survived, we know that we can get through things. And I found a really great photo the other day, which I shared on my Instagram. And it was an image of these little toys that children have where it's a rounded bottom. So even if they push it over, it pops back up. And that was a great visual representation because whether it's trauma that you're talking about or going through change and really struggling, that is a great way to demonstrate, yes, you're down now, but you will pop back up. Might take some time, but you'll get through it. And so I think one of the best ways to do that is to challenge that fixed mindset voice. I know that Carol Dweck wrote a book. I can't recall the name at the moment, but it's about growth versus fixed mindset. And there are definitely people who are more one way or the other, but we all have aspects of both in different areas of our lives. And we have that inner critic in our heads. We look in the mirror when we do a project and we look at our work and think, oh, that's terrible. So the first step is to learn what that voice sounds like, identify it, and give it a name. I call it Silly Sarah for me. And I'll be like, oh, that's just Silly Sarah talking again. And it allows me to then disassociate from that. And again, not believe everything that I think. And it allows me to recognize that I have a choice. I have a choice to let that voice put me down, or I have a choice to reframe and look at the positive side and talk to myself a more conscious way, in a more aligned way with where I want to be going. So then that's the growth mindset voice. So when Silly Sarah starts coming at me, I start thinking, are you sure you can do this? Are you really sure? What if you fail? And then the other side, almost like devil and angel talking to each other, says, well, maybe I can't achieve this tomorrow, but I can work towards that. And it's just this conversation. So being able to identify that voice allows you to kind of snap out of it. And then you can start to change. And then that builds the resilience as well.
I really love that idea. It's almost like personification of that negative side, isn't it? And so if you give it a kind of a character and you can then push that character or separate yourself from that entity.
Definitely.
It's really interesting. It's very much linked to smart recovery. The whole, you have a beast on your shoulder for addiction. So it makes people more able to separate. It's very interesting. That's going off on a bit of a tangent, but it just made me think of that. That's really interesting. Can you tell me a bit more about what is growth mindset?
My growth mindset is that willingness to change. It's that knowing we don't have to do the same thing that we've always done and being open to new ideas. You often see people who have been in the same role for 20 years and someone new comes in with energy and ideas. And perhaps those ideas are better, but that person is like, nope, they dig their heels in. And even though they might know it's better and they agree to it, they don't want to change. It's easier. They believe it's easier to stay the same. So they just become rigid and they don't want to go with these new ideas, even if it could improve their own life. They resist it. So that growth mindset is that recognition that those who bend do not break. Sometimes we have to go with the flow. Instead of swimming against the current, we need to let that current take us somewhere and be curious and learn from it. And we reframe that failure into learning and opportunity. And there's a few different approaches to develop a growth mindset. And one of the best ways that I talk about all the time is get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Step outside of your comfort zone on a regular basis. I think this is also why last year was so hard for so many people, because we were comfortable and we had not challenged ourselves with new things for quite some time. And so it was very confronting when that happened. And a way to do that is to adopt an attitude of curiosity and commit to learning. Just because we're not students anymore in an organized school working towards a degree does not mean that we're not learning anymore. And oftentimes that's why people fail. Sometimes you see people become a manager, become a CEO, and then they lose their job a year later or they start to fail. And it's because they stop doing the things that made them successful. They think, hey, I've made it. And then they put their feet up and they think, I don't have to do anything else now. But that's not the case. You always have something to learn from everybody.
We want to be lifelong learners. That's so important, isn't it? And I've proven that in my 50s when I've started a podcast and written a book and begun to paint and all these things that I didn't do when I was younger. So we can always learn and grow. And I think that's been a really big lesson for me in the last 5 years.
I think that's really key. And I'm glad that you shared that because so many people think, oh, it's too late to start something. I'm too old. I don't have the training. I don't have this. But I always like to remind people, you're not starting over. You're starting from experience. And just like it takes somebody else to learn the guitar, my dad learned to play the guitar in his youth. And so he's been playing his whole life, but he's got a buddy he plays in the band with that literally just learned last year. And he's in his 70s. So
yeah, that's amazing, isn't it? Yeah.
Learn how to play guitar.
There's people graduating university in their 70s. You're never too old to learn something or take up a new hobby or try something new or step outside of your comfort zone. And there can be so much joy that can be brought from that, I think. So It's such a good reminder for us all. Sarah, what are some of your self-care tips for us? You mentioned going outside and doing different activities and being creative and things like that. But what else can we do?
I have a morning routine that I follow every day. It's slightly altered on the weekends because I like to give myself a little bit of extra time to sleep in. But I start my mornings early so that I can give myself that time to do these things that I like doing. So I wake up at about 5 a.m. and I take at least 30 minutes where I don't touch my phone. The phone doesn't go in the bedroom with me. It charges in the living room. And I make a cup of tea, brush my teeth. I sit down, I read a little bit. And I have some books like The Daily Stoic, The Daily Food Lovers Journal. And I read a little excerpt every day. So that kind of gets me going. Chicken Soup for the Soul. And it puts me in that right frame of mind to get the day started. Then I go for a workout. I get that done because one, I know that it restores my physical energy and it gives me those endorphins. But also two, I know I'll make better food choices throughout the day. And then I really don't have any excuse for being too tired or meetings running late or not having the energy, whatever facet of energy that might be. So I think having a morning routine is incredibly important. And it doesn't have to be 5 a.m. for those of you listening. I know that sounds very scary. It certainly was when I first started, but I did not just go from waking up at 7 to waking up at 5. Started waking up at 6:45 and gave myself 15 minutes. And then over time, it just started to naturally progress into where do these things fit into my day? When am I most creative? And then that's what works for me. Some people are night owls. So they might have an evening routine. They might sleep in, do their work. And then from 6 p.m. till midnight, they have a routine of this is when I'm going to write. This is when I'm going to read. This is when I'll do whatever that activity is. So I think self-care means different things to different people. And earlier today, I was just doing some collaboration filming with some other ladies that have their own business. And the whole campaign is what's your wellness? For some people, that's yoga and meditation. For other people, that's creating music. Sometimes it's just taking a nap.
That's all really good advice. I really love that. What does integration mean to you?
I like the word integration because when you use a word like balance, like work-life balance, you're automatically implying that you have to split time between two things and that they constantly fighting this battle of trying to make them equal. I was having a conversation earlier. You cannot make work and life balance because we spend more of our time at work. The hours in the day, we spend more time at work than we do at home, generally speaking, except for now that we all work from home. But when you integrate different aspects of yourself, you don't have to wear different masks with different people. And so many of us, whether it's society, our parents, our friends, we want to fit in. That's a basic human need because in the past, if you didn't fit in, maybe you were left out of the tribe and you didn't have access to resources, right? So integration means bringing the different aspects of yourself into the things that you do and being a whole person in each different area. So your work persona should not be a completely different person than who you are at home and with your friends. You should have some elements in all of that. Now, of course, you don't need to air all of your dirty laundry at work. There's a difference between being vulnerable and oversharing, overstepping other people's boundaries, right? Maybe your boundary is one way, but for somebody else, that's overstepped their boundary. So for me, integration is allowing yourself to be who you are and not segmenting yourself into different pieces.
Currently, most of us have to socially isolate or socially distance because of COVID, and that can take a toll on our psyche and our well-being and just our level of happiness. What advice do you have for people to manage social distancing but still keep in touch and still feel connected to others?
As you said, in every location, it's different. I think for those in Hong Kong, we've really been quite lucky in the low case numbers and the limited lockdowns that we've had. And even when we've had lockdowns, the ability to still see some people to some extent, right? But in some places, the cases have just been astronomical and there really is no outlet. You are in your home and you have your groceries delivered and there's no other choice. So I think here the reminder is that we need to also reach out to other people. We do not need to, and we should not and cannot wait to be saved or wait for the other person to make that move. I remember 2 years ago, I was walking down the street and was kind of grumpy that day, thinking, God, nobody's smiling at me. Why doesn't anybody smile? Everyone's just so absorbed in their phone or fast-paced city. And then I thought to myself, well, Sarah, are you smiling at anybody? You're probably on your phone or you're probably having a grimace on your face because you're thinking about something stressful. So that maybe they did smile at you and you just didn't notice it. So I made a conscious effort to smile and say good morning or hello. And 9 times out of 10, the person smiled back. Sometimes they'd be shocked, like, whoa, somebody's talking to me. But it would invite them. It was an invitation to connect. And so I would say with this, set up that FaceTime, set up that Zoom call. I know we all have Zoom fatigue, but whatever platform that you're comfortable with, make the initiative to reach out and ask your friends, how are you? I haven't seen or heard from you in a while. Let's get on a video call. And it could even be one of the things I did with a friend in the US. We had dinner together, or dinner and she ate breakfast. And we had a conversation as if we were out at a restaurant. And there's some new app about house parties. Or
yeah, house party. That's it. Yeah, you can get a bunch of people together and all have a drink at home on your own.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, with your friends.
You can bring that energy in, and it's not the same, of course, because you're not with the people, but at least you are able to see them.
Yeah, it's making the best of the situation that we're in at the moment. And I think that's what we've all got to do and look to a future where things will improve at some point, hopefully.
Yeah.
What kind of people do you typically work with? Who are your sort of most common clients?
My most common clients are individuals who are high achievers and they need help with that. And I have a program called Energy Reset. So they need assistance with learning those tools and getting to a space where they can integrate those tools into their daily life. So these are typically people in their early 20s to 40s, the early part of their career where the blinders are on, noses to the grindstone, and they're just go, go, go. The next segment of clients that I work with are people that are older age range, 45 plus. Maybe they've had 20, 30 years work experience, and they are now looking to change, and they're committed to that change. Just like when you hire a personal trainer or you hire someone to teach you how to cook at home, plant-based meals, then I work with them on a regular basis so that they can affect change and look at things from a different lens. And then the third group I work with is students.
Awesome. Sarah, how can my listeners find you if they would like to talk more to you about your coaching and what you offer?
They can go to my website, sarahkalmeta.com. They can look me up on LinkedIn. I love to connect with people there and, always happy to answer some initial questions. And my Instagram is at Sarah the Pivoter. And that was a new moniker I created for myself last year, and it's just really stuck. Those are the 3 platforms that I'm probably the most active on. And they can reach out and send me a message. I'd love to hear from you.
Great. Thank you so much. I'll put all of that information in my show notes so that my listeners can find you easily if they want to. Thank you so much for talking to me today. It's been so interesting, and I've actually got a couple of great tips that I'm going to implement in my life. I really appreciate you sharing your wisdom with me, and it's been really wonderful to meet you. And I think I'll be in touch with you to get you to work with some of our students in the near future.
That would be fantastic. I really look forward to that. And if you have any feedback on those tips that resonated with you, I'd love it, because I love to learn and I love to know what works for different people.
Absolutely. Thanks again. So for my listeners out there, if this is something that you've enjoyed, please can you share this podcast with your friends and family? It will help me go up the iTunes charts, and it will help people find Sarah and her business Pivot Point. And if you could rate and review me on iTunes, that would be amazing. And thank you so much for listening to Hong Kong Confidential. Thanks a lot, Sarah. It's been amazing.
Thank you so much, Jules.
Hi, Confidants. I want to tell you about my Patreon page. I've joined Patreon in the hope of getting sponsorship for my Hong Kong Confidential podcast. Patreon is a great way for my listeners to get on board and sponsor me with monthly payments, and that goes towards my production costs and rewards for my members. If you're interested in checking out my Patreon page, please go to patreon.com and search up Jules Hannaford or Hong Kong Confidential. I would really appreciate you visiting my page. So that brings us to the end of another Hong Kong Confidential podcast. I'm Jules Hannaford. Thanks for joining me, and I hope you'll be with me again next week. If you enjoyed today's podcast, please can you go to iTunes to rate and review it. I would really appreciate your feedback. You can email me at jules@hongkongconfidential.net, and you can find me on Facebook and Instagram at Hong Kong Confidential. If you'd like to hit me up on Twitter, it's at Jules Hannaford. I would love to hear from you.
Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to AuscastNetwork.com for details.